this time of year, farmers do a lot of numbers. Taxes, budgeting, marketing, all they're full of sixes and sevens.
Yeah.
And really the world is full of sixes and sevens
yes.
right now. As far as a lot of numbers, they can be very important in figuring out just how one is doing. And when cooperators of farm business, farm management look at their numbers, this is something you're going to be quite interested in to find out how farmers are really doing this year.
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of numbers, and with our help, we're working through the records and helping find out where those numbers, because we already know we had 2023 was a little bit of a downturn. Where's 24 going to be? We know where the prices have been, so we're going to look at things and look and see at their financial ratios. Where did that working capital really end up on their balance sheets? With the current assets, which is the main factor, is grain inventory. Did that come down even more, which it should have with the prices? But we got some more yield, so we may not have ate away as much of that working capital as we thought it was, but we also know there are some higher costs that we're going to have to watch out for, and our family living is still creeping up, so that's going to be another need that we have to pay off. And interest rates have still steady, came down a little bit, but they're still fairly high compared to what we're used to, so it's a number we have to start thinking about a little bit more when we budget, is those family living and interest costs.
Now, your 5,500 cooperators in farm business, farm management know those ratios because they work with them every year. How many other farmers really have a good handle on those financial ratios?
Yeah, that's a good question, Stu. It's hard for people to understand that. It all goes back to having the aptitude to do really good records. And so just keeping track, whatever it is, keeping track of those year over year, and cut it off at a certain period of time and always compare back to those numbers. So when you talk about the ratios, they make more sense. If you're looking at a balance sheet 1 year from December 31st, and then you look at another one from March the 31st, that can be completely different depending on what you've done with your grain. So spending a little bit of time to make sure you're doing your tax records usually by 12/31. Also do your balance sheets at that time. That's the best time to do it as a best comparison. Then you create your own trend. And to start understanding, now you can start looking into what are these ratios? What do they mean? There's a lot of good information out there. There's information on the Farm Doc website talking about what some of these financial ratios are. Know your liquidity ratios. That would be your working capital, your current assets minus your current liabilities. That's the cash you have available. Cash is king, cash is queen. You'll hear that saying. If you have that if your crop is not able to produce what you thought, or your operating expenses are up, it's your cushion to help offset those with that working cash. Also, you could look at solvency ratios, debt to assets. So take all your debt divided by all your assets. That tells you how much of your assets your lender owns. You want to be below 50% so that you have more equity in those assets than your lender does. But it's something to trend, and that has a huge difference on the age of the farmer too. The younger farmers, that's going to be a lot more variable because they're tied into more of those shorter term assets.
You use the word lender. Now, lenders know those ratios, and your cooperators know those ratios. But the other farmers who are going to be going to see a lender who don't know those ratios could get a rude awakening, and we're trying to help them not have that rude awakening.
Right, yeah, you want to spend some time trying to educate yourself a little bit about what that lender's telling you. You want to be a smart consumer when you're buying your fertilizer, seed, and chemicals. Same thing when you want to go talk to a lender. You want to at least know what your numbers are and kind of be able to try to figure out what those financial ratios are. Now, I'm not going to tell you to get into very complicated, what's your term debt ratio, but know your balance sheet, know what an asset versus a liability is, and do some of those basic things like current ratio, which is subtracting or taking your current assets divided by your current liabilities, and take your debt divided by your assets.
There's a lot of education out there. And so if someone just wanted to go see what those ratios were and what comparisons a lender is going to make, you can get a head start in having a very successful lending season.
Yeah, that's correct. And another good place is on the Farm Doc website. We've been writing quite a bit of series on working capital right now, and you can see some comparisons where you are in the state versus where you are as far as size of farms. And so you can get an understanding. It really talks about how you calculate that, what's included in those. So take a look at some of those, look at some of those articles. We've talked about working capital, we've talked about debt to asset ratios, we've talked about various other ratios also, and talk about what goes into those information to know those numbers.
And if you had those numbers from past years, you can compare and see how you are doing, whether it's a plus or a minus.
Right, yeah, and farming is cyclical, so you don't want to look at your number 1 year over and just say that's what it is. Look at a trend, 5, 7, 10 years. If you can compile it, it makes a really big difference on what's going on. Plus, when you look at your trend, why is that number out of line? You only are going to know why that was. What was going on in that farm operation that year versus a lender that's not going to know. They're just going to see the black and white numbers that the detail behind it, add the color.